Ravatus, you haven't sent out the Macoris yet, is
I
that
did. I sent it out. Maybe it's not just me. Let me see.
right?
I
I'll put
can't.
it on as well in case that's.
Okay. I thought I've sent it out. Yes, it is. It's on the chat. You see the first I said. Can you see the message with a link?
I can't, but I've put it on again.
Oh, okay.
And of course I'll share the screen. Okay, let's do that. Let's get going.
Okay.
So we're actually going to learn tomorrow's daf. I'm giving you a preview of tomorrow's daf because there's just a very, very fascinating and somewhat well-known incident that needs to be understood, and when understood, reveals some remarkable insights for our times and for any times. So let me share it with you. Can you see that? Is it working?
Yes, yes,
You can see the sheet. Okay.
yes.
Um, right. So we're calling it how wisdom flows, and you'll see why that's important, because there are some significant differences between wisdom and information. We're living in a time where the focus is on information and not on wisdom. And one of the differences between wisdom and information is that wisdom flows. It's an energy. Wisdom is not a set of data. Wisdom is an energy that flows between people, and accessing that wisdom is part of the process and the mitzvah of learning Torah, and how we do so becomes quite important. What's also important is the idea that when your mind, if you want your mind to expand, you're going to have to engage in ideas that are not comfortable for you. They may not be comfortable because they don't fit your existing paradigms or belief systems. They may not be comfortable because you don't understand them. They just need a lot of effort in order to understand. In either case, by grappling with those concepts, you're going to expand your mind. You're going to deepen your capacity, your intellectual capacity, your Torah capacity. If all you read and learn are things that sit comfortably with you, then you're not going to develop. You're not really going to change. And the purpose of learning Torah is to be transformational. The Torah that we learn should be transformational, not informational. And we have the Gemara in Tainis, which we'll come back to at the end. Why is Torah compared to water? Rabbi Chanina Bar Idi says, because because water is like Torah in the sense that if you have a reservoir of water on level ground, it doesn't flow anywhere. It's stagnant water, and stagnant water, as you know, is not the healthiest of water. If you want water to flow, if you want there to be an energy in water, you need to have a slant. The energy has to be on the water has to be at a slant, because water flows from high to low. And af divrei Torah en mitkaimin ala b'misha da'ato shfela. And divrei Torah also needs that slope, and we'll understand what that means. It starts with an interesting story on our daf, on daf chaf of Bava Kama, which is the daf that we'll learn tomorrow, where Rav Chisda, who is the Gadol Ador, we're now in third century roughly, and Rav Chisda is the Gadol Ador. He is the great Torah authority of Babylon, Babel at that time. And you can imagine he used to give a shir probably every day. He would give a shir. One day he gives a shir and he notices somebody important is absent. You know, when a rabbi gives a shir, when a rabbi puts a lot of effort into preparing a shir, even one person who's not there, because when he prepares it, Rav Atlas, correct me if you don't have the same experience, but when you prepare, you have the people in mind that you're going to be delivering it to. You prepare for them. You don't just prepare. And when you have people in mind and they're not there, or some of the people that you had in mind aren't there, it's very disappointing. You've put the whole, it's right, I see, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You've put all this in, you have in mind certain people, and one or two or three or four of them aren't there. It doesn't matter how many are there. You notice the ones who are not there, and you feel it. So Rav Chisda notices there's one very important person not in the shir. His name is Rami Bar Chama, who happens to be his son-in-law. So in shul the next morning, he says to Rami Bar Chama, "Lo havyet gaban be'urta b'tchuma." You weren't in the Beis HaMedrash this morning. What happened to you? Where were you? I gave one of the best shiurim in my life. I asked such a powerful question that I've grappled with for so long, that the whole Beis HaMedrash grappled with. It was such an explosive moment in the Beis HaMedrash, and you weren't there. You missed it. What happened to you? So Rami Bar Chama says, no problem. There's a recording. I'll watch the Zoom recording afterwards. No, says Rav Chisda, you don't get it. If you watch the Zoom afterwards, you get information. I'm not talking about the information you missed. I know you can catch up the information. I'm talking about the experience you missed, that you weren't part of this unpacking of this difficult concept and working it out and finding ways to approach it. You weren't part of the process of Talmud Torah that took place in our Beis HaMedrash this morning. Almost he says, okay, Rav Chisda, well, lucky you're my father-in-law, and I can ask you, my mili ma'aliyata, what exactly did you talk about? So obviously you're dying to tell me, so tell me, just say the shir over again. Amalei says to him, the question was, Hadar b'chatzer chavero shelo midato, tzarich la'alot lo schar o ein tzarich. So I want to go to Yerushalayim for the weekend, and I'm planning on staying in a hotel. But I check and I see that Alan there is not in shul, so he's probably in Yerushalayim. So I'm going to check to see, maybe Alan's in his beautiful apartment in Yerushalayim, and he'll have me for the weekend. So I knock on Alan's door, I ring the bell, nobody opens. So I try the door, and the door opens, and the apartment is empty. There's no sign of Alan or his family, but this beautiful apartment is ready, and I know he would not bother anything. On the contrary, if he knew I was in Yerushalayim, he would invite me. So I spend the weekend in his apartment, and I leave it spick and span. I leave it meticulous. Nothing is used. Everything's perfect. Alan comes back and he hears what's happened, and he's not all that happy that I took advantage of his apartment while he wasn't there. And he says, look, I think you should pay rent for the weekend. You were going to go to a hotel. I think you should pay rent. I say, but it didn't cost you anything. You weren't there in any case. Nobody was there. It wasn't rented. It was empty. What did you lose? I benefited. You didn't suffer anything. Why should I have to pay you? That's the question, says Rav Chisda, that we discussed in the Beis HaMedrash this morning when you weren't there. Amalei Rami Bar Chama says, father-in-law, I can't believe what I'm hearing. Are you telling me that's what I missed this morning? Are you all upset because I didn't hear that question? It's matnitin here. That's an obvious. There's an obvious answer. It's clear. There's a Mishnah that gives the answer. Why waste time even questioning it? Says Rav Chisda to his son-in-law, really? It's a Mishnah? I've spent hours preparing this topic. I've looked throughout the Mishnayos. I've looked throughout Shas. I've looked through all the Brises. I've looked everywhere. I couldn't find anything that would give us a clue as to how to deal with the situation. Do I or don't I have to pay Alan rent? So he says, hey, Matnitin, so which Mishnah exactly are you talking about? Amalei, Rami Bar Chama gives him a very weird answer. And he says, L'chi teshamesh li, if you serve me, if you do something, if you work for me, I'll answer it. I'll tell you which Mishnah. So you would think Rav Chisda would just laugh it off and walk away. No, Shakal Sudre Karachle. He takes Rabbi Bar Chama's talis and folds it up and puts it in the talis bag for him. Amalei, so Rami Bar Chama says, okay, thank you very much. Now I'm willing to tell you what Mishnah it is. It's actually the Mishnah in our Sugya on Daf Yutet, the part of Bava Kama that we're learning at the moment. This is where you'll find the answer. Now, the Gemara goes into a discussion as why Rav Chisda doesn't agree that Mishnah is a valid source and so on and so forth. That's not what I want to focus on. I just want to focus on the event, the strange behavior of Rami Bar Chama. He has an obvious answer to a difficult question, and he won't tell his father-in-law who's the Gadol Hador. This This is Rav Chisda. It's his father-in-law. He's a Kohen. He's the big shot in the whole community of Bavel. And he says, I want you to work for me before I give you the answer. What does he mean? What is this all about? So there are two difficulties here that we're going to look at. The one is a technical difficulty, and the other is a conceptual difficulty. The technical difficulty, Rabbi Akiva Eger asks. So you'll know that Rabbi Akiva writes the Gilayon Hashas. These are just notes in his margin. This wasn't a perush. The Gilayon Hashas is on many of the pages of the Gemara. You've just got short little notes of the Rabbi Akiva Eger. Sometimes he will not articulate what's bothering him. You have to work it out. And this is one such case. Where he says, I in Mishnah Melech, look at the Mishnah Melech, so you can work out from that. If you look at the Mishnah Melech, you can work out what's worrying Rabbi Akiva Eger. What's worrying Rabbi Akiva Eger is there is a halakha that you're not allowed to use a kohen for your own personal use. The same as you can't use anything that belongs to the Beis Hamikdash. And if you do, it's me'ilah. You're over the issue of me'ilah. You're not allowed to use things that are dedicated to the Beis Hamikdash. And a Kohen is dedicated to the service of the Beis Hamikdash, and therefore you can't use a Kohen to serve you for your own private needs. How could Rami Bar Chama have allowed, never mind instructed, Rav Chisda to serve him? So the Sefer Mitzvahs Gadol, the Smag was a Baal Tosfos, so this is going back to the 13th century. The Smag was one of the early Baalei Tosfos. He was a Talmid of Rabbeinu Tam. Rabbeinu Tam, as you know, was the towering founder of the French school of Tosfos. And it started a whole system of learning, which we follow until this day. And the Smag was a Talmid of Rabbeinu Tam. And he answers and says, you're not allowed to use a Kohen just to have him do something for you. But if you're paying him, if you're employing him, you are allowed to use him. So I can't say to a Kohen, would you mind cleaning my car for me today? I can't do that. But if the Kohen owns a car wash and I take my car in to be washed and I'm going to pay the Kohen for washing my car, then it's absolutely in order. You can employ a Kohen, you can hire a Kohen, although you cannot have him do something for you for nothing. That's how the Smag answers the question. The Mishnah Lamelech says in that case, he asks, but where's the payment here? Rami Bar Chama asks his father-in-law to do something for him. His father-in-law folds his talus. Not a big job, but still he's doing something for him. Where's the payment? Says the Mishnah Lamelech, the payment is the fact that he resolved his problem, the fact that he answered his halachic shaila about renting Alan's place in Yerushalayim, he resolved it with a Mishnah that Rav Chisda was not aware of the possibility of extrapolating this principle out of a Mishnah that's talking about a completely different topic altogether. And for Rav Chisda, there could be no more payment better than that. To achieve clarity, to understand something that I didn't understand before. If you're able to help me with that, there's nothing that needs to be paid more than that. So that's why Rami Bar Chama could use Rav Chisda, even though Rav Chisda is a Kohen, Rami Bar Chama is not a Kohen. But the conceptual side of it is much more challenging to understand. What does he want? What does Rami Bar Chama want? Your father-in-law gives you, tells you off a little. It gives you a bit of mussar. You weren't in the shir this morning. He tells you you missed something spectacular. You ask him what it is. He tells you what the question is. You know the answer. So okay, great. Tell him the answer. What is this whole charade of do something for me, fold my talus, then I'll tell you. What is that for? Why is he saying that? And the most exceptional treatment of this piece of Gemara is from the Hakdama to the Shari Yashar. The Shari Yashar is the most important work that Reb Shimon Shkop wrote. Reb Shimon Shkop was the previous generation. He died just before the Second World War. My Rosh Yeshiva was a Talmid of Reb Shimon Shkop. He learned with Reb Shimon Shkop. So this is our era. This is from our time. He was a pre-World War II Gadol. He was a Talmid of Reb Chaim Soloveitchik, one of the great Talmidim of Reb Chaim Soloveitchik. And he innovated a method of learning that was probably way ahead of his time then, but very apt for our times. It's a conceptual method of learning It's a method of learning that takes into account human psychology. It's very, very deep and sophisticated, and it's just he's a wonderful resource of Shimon Shkop. At the beginning of Sha'arei Yosher, the Sha'arei Yosher, by the way, deals with how in halakha do we deal with uncertainty, because we know when things are certain, we know what to get. Fred, I see you made a comment, one should not get payment for learning Torah, and therefore I take it you're asking that as a question. So why would he have to pay? I mean, that's a good question. Why would there be a necessity for payment at all? And we'll come to that as well. And yes, this is an so that's in fact the sugya that we're dealing with. The Sha'arei Yosher deals with sfekot. How do you deal with uncertainty in halakha? Because the truth is, everything is uncertain. There is nothing we know. All we can do is assume. We can make assumptions. Even things that we see, even things we have data on, we might be 99% sure that they are reality. But we've all got our own lenses and ways of interpreting reality. So when we're working with the world, generally we work with the world on the basis of assumptions. And in halakha, there are many ways of making assumptions. A rov is an assumption. If there's a majority, we make an assumption. A chazaka, if there's a chazaka, we make assumptions. So his sefer deals with situations of uncertainty, sfekot. How do you deal with them in terms of living with certainty in a world of uncertainty? If I were to tell you what the Sha'arei Yosher is really about, that's how I would classify it. How do you use halakha to live with certainty in a world of uncertainty? And at the beginning of the Sha'arei Yosher, he writes the most magnificent hakdama, an introduction, which is a work on its own. It's a little booklet on its own. It's an essay that everybody should learn. Nobody should go through their life without having learned the hakdama to the Sha'arei Yosher, the introduction to the Sha'arei Yosher. A friend of mine who also is an avid follower of the Matmonim, Rabbi Micha Berger, wrote a translation of this little piece, a beautiful translation of this work, and I quote it in the sheets on the next page, the bottom of the page. He calls it "Widen Your Tent," and it's available on Sefaria, but it's really something worth studying from beginning to end. And he deals with various different sections. He's got a beautiful piece on how to expand your own identity, who you are, how an unevolved person sees who they are, and how an evolved person is able to expand the I into something universal rather than something very microscopic. And then he goes into the difference between the first luchot and the second luchot and the art of learning Torah. It's brilliant. And then he comes into his own sefer and he says, in the second line where I've written it in bold, Hinei eda shesifri ze lo yeh mekubal lakol. I realize that this sefer, the Sha'arei Yosher, is not going to be accepted by everybody. Ki harbe lomdim lo hurgilu lahagot b'derech ha'iyun. Because present company excluded, there are people who are not accustomed to learning in depth. They learn the daf yomi, they spend an hour or two on the daf and they keep going. They're just not into it. They're not into learning in depth. So they're not going to appreciate the sefer, and it's okay. There are different ways to learn, and that's not a problem. And furthermore, he says in the next line, V'od lezeh sherova inyanim hamitba'arim bo hem inyanim hadrushim iyun v'yigia. The things I deal with in the sefer are things that need enormous attention and effort and toil to really understand what these issues are. Because I'm dealing with it in the whole of Shas. I bring the whole of the Talmud together and the great Rishonim, and it requires an enormous effort and application. Lo yitpesu gam belev mevin b'habata ba'alma. And even an intelligent person will not be able to understand it just by glancing at it, by running through it, reading it through as if it's an article in the New York Times. ולא כל אדם רוצה לתלות החיסרון בעצמו מחמת עומק המושג וחיסרון המשיג. And most people, when they study something and don't understand it, are not willing to say, I'm the problem. I don't understand it because it's too difficult for me. I don't understand it because it's too deep for me. I don't understand it because I haven't applied myself enough to try and understand it. People don't say that. People write it off and they say it's complex, it's complicated, it's not clear. They'll give all sorts of reasons to find the psul, to disqualify the work rather than to acknowledge the work might be really great. It's just that I haven't put the work in. And he says, now he comes to our Gemara in Bava Kama, and he says, he learned a wonderful idea from his late brother-in-law, Reb Shlomo Zalman ben Arav Reb Kalman Abel from Telz. The Abel family was a family in Telz. And he says his brother-in-law taught him a wonderful thing in this piece of Gemara that we've just learned with Rami Bar Chama. And he says, העניין הוא שבדבר שצריך עיון ויגיעה, תלוי עיקר הדבר אם המתלמד מאמין במעלת המלמדו. Listen to that carefully and try never to forget it. עניין הוא שבדבר שצריך עיון ויגיעה, something that needs effort to understand. תלוי עיקר הדבר. The main issue of whether or not you will understand it depends on whether the student believes in the authority of the teacher. As in lo yavin barishona, if you believe that the author is a great authority, or if you believe that the Magid Shir, the teacher, is a great authority, then if you don't understand it at first, what will you say? If you're reading an article by Einstein and you don't get it, you're not going to say Einstein was an idiot. I've read his article and that doesn't make any sense, because you realize you would just be making a comment about yourself. You wouldn't be making a comment about him. You would say, I need to read it again and again and again. Maybe I need to get a tutor to help me with it because this is really very difficult. And so if you are ma'amin b'ma'alat ha'melamdo, if you believe and trust in it's not just the authority of the teacher, it's the ma'alat ha'melamdo, the stature of the teacher. Then if you don't at first understand, you will take accountability for not understanding. For Yosif Ometz liagea et atzmo, he will put more effort in to toil in it. Va'az, and then Yavin ba'achrona, eventually he will understand it. That's how learning works. If you understand it at first reading, it wasn't challenging for you. If you understand it at first reading, it's nothing new for you. It's not mind expanding for you. Anything worthwhile you learn, you will not understand at first reading. And now comes the question, are you going to reread? And are you going to reread it again and again and again? There's an American Russian novelist by the name of Nabucco, who some of you might have read, who says there's no such thing as reading. There's only rereading. Reading something the first time is nothing. It's worthless. If it's so superficial that you can understand it the first time, why are you wasting your time on it altogether? Most things that are worth reading and worth understanding, you're going to have to read 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 times. And you'll only do that if you believe it's worthwhile. And you'll only believe it's worthwhile if you believe you're studying Shakespeare, or you're learning Einstein, or you're learning a Rambam. Then you'll spend that time on it because you trust the stature of the author. But if in his eyes the teacher or the author is light, a lightweight, and it's not really worth rereading and rereading and rereading and working on it. He wants to get on with other things. Then if he doesn't understand them at first sight, he will leave them and just move on. Or yevatlem belibo v'dayo, or he will discard it, he will trivialize it in his mind and leave it alone and go off. That's what we do if we don't really hold the author in high esteem. Rami Bar Chama realized that what he wanted to give his father-in-law was not a piece of information. If it was information, Rav Chisda would have worked it out himself. The reason that Rami Bar Chama was able to associate a Mishnah on a completely different topic to the question of Alan's apartment is because he's going in very, very deeply to what the issue really is. There's a very subtle and deep understanding of the principle that he's trying to teach. And therefore, lo ratzah lelamdo ad sheyit'ametz lo sherav Chisda mishtokek lehitlamed mimenu ketalmid mirav. Rami Bar Chama didn't want to waste his time teaching Rav Chisda this idea if Rav Chisda didn't crave mishtokek lehitlamed. I'm going to talk about that word in a moment, to learn from him as a Talmid from a Rav. Because he realized that if Rav Chisda, who was the more senior man, Rav Chisda was the older man, Rav Chisda was the more learned man, if Rav Chisda was just going to listen to it from a position of arrogance, he wouldn't understand the subtlety of what Rami Bar Chama had discovered. I need you to be willing to listen to me as your Rebbe just for this moment. If you're willing to listen to me as your Rebbe for this moment, then you'll understand, you'll invest the effort to understand what it is that I'm saying. And I will know. And therefore he said, I want to see you behave like a Talmid to a Rav. This is about flow. This is about energy. And the wisdom will flow from me to you if you are treating me like your Rebbe. This is about relationship. This is not just about information, and I would have written it down and you could have read it on the internet. That's not what this is. This is a flow of wisdom from a younger man to an older man. And the flow will only take place if you behave like a Talmid for this moment. And then I can share it with you, which is what he says to him. Now, this word lehitlamed, I put the footnotes to my friend's comments in the Widen Your Tent. He points out lehitlamed is a very unusual word. One would have expected Reb Shimon Shkop to write sherav Chisda mishtokek lilmod mimenu, to learn from him. What is lehitlamed? That's a hitpail form. It's a reflexive form. Lilmod means to learn. Lelamed means to teach. Lehitlamed means to be transformed by the learning. That's what lehitlamed means. And Rami Bar Chama says to his father-in-law, I need you to be willing and open to be transformed by what I'm going to teach you. It's something so revolutionary and something so important that you need to be willing to be transformed. And then the Reb Shimon goes on to explain a Gemara in Yuma where Avraham was upset that in those days old age wasn't showing. The plastic surgeons couldn't earn a living in the days of Avraham because people didn't age. They looked young all the time. They looked in their prime until they died, and it wasn't working for Avraham. And the reason it wasn't working is because nobody knew the difference between Avraham and Yitzchak. And so Avraham actually asked, Ata Avraham uvai zikna. Avraham asked for old age to express itself in a person's body, in a person's appearance. And Reb Shimon explains in Yan Zikna Amur B'zehu hu seva mitkale lechol ayin ro'eh. So what Avraham wanted was that anybody could see that I'm the older man. She'ikara to'edet la'akir ma'alat hazikna hu lemitlamed. That's so that you should see an older person and know this person has had a lot of experience. You're talking to somebody in their 60s or 70s or 80s. You're talking to somebody who's been around for a long time. He's seen a lot or she's seen a lot. There's a lot to learn from this person. And whatever expertise you have, you might be the biggest professor of chemistry or of nuclear science or whatever it is. And this person might be a peasant. But in their life, there is no expert bigger than this person who for 80 years has studied their own life. And you can learn from that life. But you need to be able to see that this is an expert. You need to be able to see that this is an older man. So Avraham asks for old age to be something that is visible. And he says that's part of the whole thing, so that you can learn from somebody and make yourself junior to that person, so that the flow of energy comes from them to you. And so Reb Shimon says in the next paragraph, and so I would hope that if you are studying my Sefer and you don't understand it in the beginning, you don't agree with what I'm writing, you'll apply your mind, you'll go into it deeply, you'll reread it and reread it until you really are able to absorb what I've devoted my life to explaining and understanding, You're not going to get it in one reading, but if you apply yourself, you will. And then he says in the final paragraph, and if you find that there's some things that I say that others have said, or you have some questions on what I say, bear in mind, I didn't do much research for this work, Reb Shimon says, which is really important. He says, because this is not a shaylas and shuvas. I'm not paskining al halacha. If I'm paskining halacha, I would need to research what other people have said. I'm revealing to you my way of thinking. And this has to be my way of thinking. And if you want to study the Sefer, then you'll study my way of thinking. And with that, you will learn how to think in this particular way. You'll learn a new methodology of Torah learning. And this links into something that the Vilna Gaon says in the beginning of Mishlei, where the Sefer starts with Mishlei Shlomo ben David Melech Yisrael. This is the book of Mishlei written by Shlomo, the son of King David, the king of Israel. Asks the Vilna Gaon, really? Do you have to start your Sefer saying who you are? Why did you look on the cover and you'll see it was written by Shlomo? And if you want to know who Shlomo is, you can Google him and you'll know that he was David HaMelech's son. And if you want to know what his job is, go on to LinkedIn and you'll find that he's the king of Israel. You don't have to start every work you write with telling us who you are, who your father is, and what you do for a living. But, says the Vilna Gaon, Ki halomed b'sefer tzarich le'da mihu hamechabro. Before you read a book or an article for that matter, determine who the author is. Because you've got to ask yourself, I have limited time. Is this worth applying my effort to? If I'm just going to scan it, then why would I even bother? If it's so superficial that at first scan I can understand it, why would I even bother? So I'm probably going to have to read it a few times. If I'm going to read it a few times, will that be worth it? You'll know whether or not it will be worth it by who the author is. And so says the Vilna Gaon, before you read something, check who the author is. Before you engage in a process of learning, check who the teacher is. Because if the author is great in wisdom, in God-fearing, and in Torah, you know that there will be enormous wisdom in that book. It's worth investing in. It's worth putting the effort into, because there will be an enormous amount of wisdom in it. Once you've checked, you know who the author is, there is the opportunity to learn from it, and then it will be worthwhile doing so. So that's the piece of Gemara. We start off with this, the question Rav Chisda has. He's telling his son-in-law, you missed something great in the Beis HaMedrash this morning. The son-in-law asking what it is. Rav Chisda shares with him what the question was. Son-in-law says it's a Mefurish, a Mishnah, it's clear. But before he tells him that, he asks him to do something for him, because he doesn't want what he's saying to appear trivial. He wants Rav Chisda to really apply his mind to why it is that Rami Bar Chama links the Mishnah in Bava Kama with the question about the rental that needs to be paid. The depth of understanding of the question of rent and the depth of understanding of the Mishnah, that when you get to first principles, then you can start comparing and you can extrapolate. Two laws might look very, very different on the surface, but when you get to first principles, you realize the first principles beneath each of them is a similar first principle, and you can learn one idea from the other. But for that, he wants Rav Chisda just for a moment to be his student. He wants Rav Chisda just for that moment to be mevatel himself, to diminish his own ego, and allow the flow of Torah to come from the young Rami Bar Chama to the older and more established Rav Chisda as a student studying at the feet of his Rebbe. So that, as the Gemara says in Tainis, that just as water goes from a high place to a low place, af divrei Torah ein mitkaimim ela b'mi sheda'ato shvela. So if you want to learn, it's really important that before you do so, you make yourself a little bit lower. And I must tell you that in yeshiva, I used to be very careful at every single shir, and I learned with my Rosh Yeshiva every single day. I would take a moment before the shir and say to myself, this is a man who's devoted his life to this learning. This is a man who has learned this piece of Gemara that we've learning hundreds of times. This is a man who's given shiurim on this piece of Gemara tens of times. This is a man who sat at the feet of Reb Shimon Shkop. This is a man who knew the Brisker Rov. This is a man who was in touch with the greats of the previous generation. This is who I'm privileged to learn from. And then you open your heart and you take in whatever you can from this amazing source of wisdom. And when I studied with Reb Meir Soloveitchik as well, to sit before him and to remind myself, this is the son of the Brisker Rov, the grandson of Reb Chaim Soloveitchik. He saw the Brisker Rov every day. He saw his grandfather. He learned Torah with his grandfather, Reb Chaim Soloveitchik. We only have access to these people through books, through Sforim. But here's the man himself. And to remind myself every time I sat before him, this is who I'm learning from. And so it is when we open a Sefer. I'm learning a Reb Shimon Shkop at the moment to understand who it is that we're studying, who this really is, and what this really is, and what this really means. We're learning a smag. We're going back to a Reb Moshe Mikotzi from the 13th century. We're learning a Gemara in Tainis. What is this? Who are these amazing people that we have the privilege to learn from? And if we can do that, then not only will we gain the information and the knowledge that we're seeking, but the wisdom will flow to us, and in a very inner way, because wisdom is something inside us. It's not on the surface. And the wisdom has to penetrate our hearts. Wisdom doesn't sit on the surface. And our wisdom will penetrate our hearts if we're able to open ourselves correctly to these amazing teachers that we have the privilege to learn from. So I'll stop there and take any questions if there are any.
What would make him think that his father-in-law wouldn't listen to him without having all the other stuff? If he was such a gadol hador, why would you think that your father-in-law wouldn't listen to you?
Yeah, great question. And I think firstly, the fact that he's such a gadol hador makes it even harder. I mean, imagine, who's the greatest gadol that you've had the privilege of meeting?
Me personally?
Yes.
Rav Breuer.
Rav Breuer. So can you imagine, you've got a vort on the parsha, and you're going to tell Rav Breuer, and he's going to listen to you like you're his Rebbe? I mean, it would be arrogant to make such an assumption. He might do it, but to make such an assumption. So to do that, even when somebody is really that great, it requires effort to remind oneself who this person really is, and to be able to learn from that person. So certainly young Rami Bar Chama answering a question that Rav Chisda struggled with and didn't have an answer for made him wonder whether Rav Chisda would truly be open to the subtlety of what it was that he was teaching. And it's Rav Chisda's greatness to go along with that and to understand, yes, I do actually have to do something. It's not just a matter of saying, yes, boy, I'll tell me, I'm listening. It's much more than that. It's actually going through the process of making yourself a Talmid in order to learn that. You actually learned and knew Rav Breuer. That's amazing, huh?
I was in his house hundreds of times. I was there for Shabbos many times.
Amazing. A wonderful school. So I'm sure that stays with you for your entire life.
Yeah.
The note I sent you, let me elaborate. We're not supposed to use the Kohen. He's dedicated to God, so it's Me'ilah if we use him. But if you pay him a salary, that's okay. So that's what my note implied. You're not supposed to pay somebody to learn Torah.
Correct, but he wasn't paying him to learn Torah. The Torah was the payment. He was paying him for folding his talis. The job was, you folded the talis for me. Now, am I going to pay you? I've got to pay you. Otherwise, I'm using you for nothing. Well, I'll pay you with the Torah that I have that you'll find wonderful.
So is folding a talis worth a pruta?
Is folding a talis, depends on the talis, depends who you are. I know that when my son and I daven in the same minyan, without failing, since he was a little boy, he folds my talis. And it's very precious. It's a very precious moment of intimacy. He gets very upset if I start folding it, even today. It's a very precious moment of intimacy. So to me, is his folding my talis worth a pruta? His folding my talis is worth $1 million to me. Okay, thank you very much. Nice learning with you once again. Rav Atlas, next week I am here, and then I'm away for 2 weeks.
Okay.
We
So
can get
good.
some other. I'm sure you have somebody amazing to
yes.
To take my place, but I'll be overseas and different
Okay.
times.
Okay. So we'll see you, but next week we'll still see you.
But
So
next week
we'll
I'll
see you
be
next
home
week.
session, yes.
And thank you very much for a fascinating share. Reminding us we're living at an age where there's a lot of information flowing from place to place, and sometimes we tend to believe that is all that there is, information. So it's very important to remind ourselves that wisdom is what is important, and it's much more complex than just information. Thank you very much. And
Thank you all. Have a good rest of your day.
Pleasure. Thank you. You too. So we'll have a break now, and at 11 o'clock we'll be back for the next session. Thank you.